Hey guys, this is Kendall Terry, and this is Evolution Part 2. So we're just going to pick up right where we left off. The first thing when we're looking at this is, how does natural selection occur? That's really one of the main focuses of evolution. That's really what we're talking about in this chapter. And the first is that all species have genetic variation. You can see that in the picture here. There's obvious differences between the different insects that you see in the picture. And that's because variation occurs in a population. For natural selection to occur, there has to be variation. You can look around the class and see variation. You can look around the Smoky Mountains and see variation. It's not just all one species. And even amongst the same species, you have differences even there. For instance, in our classroom, we're all sitting there, we're all part of the same species, Homo sapiens, but there's differences or variation there, and that's a key term for this unit. The second is that the environment presents many different challenges to individuals' ability to reproduce. In other words, you have to survive whatever environment you're in to be able to reproduce. That means you have to evade predators, you have to find food, be that a prey or a plant. You have to, or you have to have space, you have to have water, you have to have a habitat, whatever it is that you may need to survive. And the environment that you live in, you have to be able to adapt for that environment. If that environment changes, you have to be able to change as well. And you can see just a couple different environments on the screen that were pulled up. Of course, the Smoky Mountains that you can see right in here. This is the Sahara Desert type picture. Here is the European coast. Very different environments that you have to survive in to reproduce. And some organisms are going to be better at surviving in those environments than others. The ones that are better able to survive will be more likely to be around to reproduce. And really that gets us to the next point here. Organisms tend to produce more offspring than their environment can support. So those organisms that do reproduce many times produce more than their environment can hold. So several of them are going to die off. Well, which ones are going to die off? The ones that are not suited as well for the environment, or the ones that don't have the adaptations that help them as much as others. So you get that other thing that causes natural selection to occur. The fourth here is that individuals better able to cope with the challenges of their environment tend to leave more offspring. So those individuals that are better at surviving, those individuals that are healthier, those individuals that are better at finding food, better at evading predators, better at finding water, whatever it may be, they are going to reproduce more offspring than those that are weak or feeble or barely surviving. So if you have the adaptations that really help you survive, then you are more likely to reproduce more offspring. And then finally, the fifth one here is the traits of individuals best suited to a particular environment tend to increase in a population over time. In other words, they tend to pass those traits down. So then each generation after them looks more like whatever it was that they had that helped them survive. And I've got a couple pictures of birds of paradise here. These are classic examples of passing those traits down, and you get these crazy looks and colors and dances and different things that have helped them survive, helped them find mates, helped them reproduce, and they pass that trait down to the next generation then. The final thing here when we're looking at natural selection evolution is, how do species form? We've looked at that, how organisms survive and their potential of reproducing, their fitness, you could say. But this here is looking at actually how do species form. They form by a process called speciation. This is a process by which new species form. And this could be some kind of environmental change that's caused a split between a population, and now you've got two different sides of this population, and if the environment changes or something's different on one side that's not on the other, then you could have differences develop. As those differences develop, if it becomes different enough, they may not be able to reproduce with each other. A divergence is the accumulation of differences between groups. Diverge, meaning they start here as one point and they go away from each other. That's diverging, or going in different directions. And that could end up with organisms that have similarities but are not the same. And that was on the last video. We talked about stuff like homologous structures, those things that have the same forearm as you, the carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. They may not look exactly the same because they've diverged. They've had to adapt to possibly a little different environment, but they have the same structure in there. So divergence comes from organisms that have a common ancestor that have had to adapt to an environment that they were put in. Reproductive isolation is the inability of formally interbreeding groups to mate or produce fertile offspring. So you have something that has kept them away from each other for enough time that now they're no longer able to reproduce with each other. So that reproductive isolation, that cause, that shift that's put them at opposite sides, and now even if they come back together, they'll no longer be able to reproduce with each other. That process is called reproductive isolation, and now you have speciation. You have a forming that new species that's there that now you need to give a new name because they can no longer interbreed, and that's really the definition of species. Organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. If they can't interbreed, they can't produce fertile offspring, then they are different species, and they need their own, at that point, name and habitats and things like that.